This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of NCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 190 here in the den. Nick Maxon alongside Noah Grant here in the sort of middle portions of December, so to speak. We're just a couple of weeks away from Christmas break, of course, for those who are still in school. And if you're not, well, you know, the working world, you get like maybe a day. I mean, I'll be working on Christmas, so I guess I'll put that out there. But yeah, I mean, what, we get a day, maybe two, if we're lucky.
It's not like the things and the times of past, the turntables. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Isn't that strange, you know, how like it kind of just, and maybe it's just because it's been a while for me, you know, you go from a couple of weeks off to maybe 3 weeks and then all of a sudden it's like a day or two.
Yeah.
That's strange. And it feels different too when you get to that stage, you know, because.
Well, I think it's something you normally look forward to, right? You know, you know you're going to have that time off and
it feels like it lasts longer, right? Now it's, you go from Halloween to Thanksgiving to the holidays to New Year, just like that. I mean,
yep.
And it's like, wait.
Well, you want to talk about just like that? How about the St. Cloud State men's and women's teams? Both very good stretches for them heading into essentially their bye week, so to speak, over the course of the holiday. The women are off for basically a calendar month and then some. Yep. The men will be off for at least 3 weeks. So we have some things planned, of course, coming up in the couple of weeks, but they don't, as they had very good showings as they push through into the middle of their conference play before they start the second half of their seasons. And without further ado, why don't we jump into a jam-packed week filled with 5 games total for the Huskies squads. Yeah. We start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes presented by HuskiesIllustrated.com and the Soda Pod. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com. Episode 190 here in the den. Nick Max and Noah Grant here joining you. Coming up on the middle of December 12th for a release date for today's show, depending on when you're listening to us, either if it's on Tuesday or a little bit later into the week. Of course, a little bit easier to catch up now that a lot of the teams are pretty much done for the first half of their season, so to speak. Might have some games kind of straggling through as we push into the holiday break, but that's kind of about it. Nick, I mean, let's jump right into it. I mean, we start on the women's side here, and the Huskies, of course, 3 games for them. We'll get to that, but other than that, we did have games going on. Of course, Duluth and Wisconsin ended up playing on that Sunday, like I said, and I believe Duluth was the one that ended up winning on the 3rd. I think we recapped that last week, so that kind of got our week it started off on Sunday. Huskies played on Tuesday, and then on Friday, the only other matchups, Minnesota playing Wisconsin. It was a win each way. The Gophers win 5-3 in the first night, and then Wisconsin pushing back with a 5-1 victory. Both of those games at Ritter Arena in Minnesota. So pound for pound, both of them in regulation as well too. So a pretty even split any way you look at it. St. Thomas beating Bemidji State 4-2. I believe that is their first conference win of the year, and then Bemidji State kicked back with a 4-0 victory of their own. And then it was a Saturday-Sunday matchup. Ohio State winning 6-1 and 4-1. Not really any surprise there. Mankato just not able to match the firepower of the Buckeyes. But Nick, we start on Tuesday, December 5th. The Huskies lose in a shootout, technically a 1-1 tie according to the pairwise standings. 2-1 is the official score. Attendance of 702. This one was at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center.
It was.
Yeah, 700 people in attendance, which is awesome. Like I said, this team is a very good hockey team, and if you're a Huskies fan, you're going to want to watch this squad. They outshot Minnesota 12-7 in the first, 10 even in period number 2, and 8-5 before the Gophers tacked on a 6-0 margin in the extra frame, trying to take things home. It was actually the Huskies outshooting the Gophers 30-28. This game had everything you were looking for. The Gophers' only tally came in the first period. Peyton Hemp 7th on the power play. Gophers go very nice shot. Gophers go 1 for 4 on the man advantage. And you think about this women's hockey team. I mean, essentially it was a bumper shot from the goal line right into kind of the middle of the slot there on the dot, essentially, but slot area. And the Gophers get on the board. I mean, a really nice seeing eye shot up over the glove. And then the Huskies bounce back. Essentially kind of a miscue. It was a regroup for the Gophers, and the defenseman wasn't able to handle the puck cleanly. Turns into a 2-on-1, and then a really nice short side glove snapshot has the Huskies tied. Addie Scribner's first from Avery Myers, the 5:34 mark of period number 2. And that was all the scoring we were going to get until we got to the shootout. First of all, I mean, the Gophers get the lone goals in the shootout in the first shooter and the third. First one was a really slick backhand forehand move. And then the third Gopher goal, pretty slick backhand to seal it off. But I'll tell you what, even though not every goal ended up in the net in terms of the shootout, some really smooth moves, I would say, from both squads. You can really tell a pretty soft set of mitts for players on both of these squads. Huskies, unfortunately, drop that extra point according to the WCHA standings, but faceoffs were dead even, 32 aside. Can't complain about that. We talked about how Minnesota's been up and down. And, it's funny, of course, my parents grew up, as Gophers fans. I did too. My dad went to the University of Minnesota, so of course he watches the women's team as well as the men. And he texted me after the game. He goes, "This St. Cloud team must be really good." And I'm like, they definitely are. And we'll get to the end of the week here, but I mean, they played this Gophers team to 1 goal, essentially a pair of 2-1 finishes both times, one in a shootout and one in regulation. Nick, you got to feel good about that result. I mean, shootouts, they are what they are. They're not really an indicator of, necessarily how a team plays. And as good as
for one thing, though.
Well, as good as the Huskies goaltending has been, it's just the Gophers have so much firepower in terms of the offensive prowess that you knew that the high-end players for the Gophers might have a pretty good chance in the shootout frame.
For those listening, I think it's cute when Noah thinks of what he thinks I'm about to say. He missed on both tries.
Well, I was still finishing my initial.
I know,
but
he's annoyed. Anyway, so no, it was more that they got to the shootout, and I say it because you mentioned. No, hold on, you're forgetting a couple of things here. St. Cloud was shorthanded for 4 minutes and 46 seconds of the overtime. Remember, it was CC Bolby. It took a 5-minute manger and a game misconduct at the end of the third against a Minnesota power play, which coming into that game was over 41% on the essentially completion rate. They were number 1 in the nation. So, and there was another minor penalty that they took before then. So Idalski's looking at 1-1. St. Cloud was pushing too. They were really trying to get some kind of bounce, something before the end of regulation. You could argue they got a little bit maybe too aggressive. Cece Wolby, a big hit on Abby Murphy, actually, in the open ice.
Yeah, right off the face-off.
Right off the face-off.
I mean, that was one that even in a men's game, I mean, you would have called it, I think.
Exactly. Just so I say that not because it's like I'm doubting one side or the other, but I think it is of note that St. Cloud was able to kill off essentially the entire overtime shorthanded minus 16 or 14 seconds, give or take a couple there. Just because, again, that power play goal they had was their only goal that they scored in the first 60 minutes. Granted, kind of it was a bumper play, but it was sort of a broken bumper play if you watched it back. Just very quick release, CNI shot perfectly placed. I mean, I'm tipping my hat to Peyton. That was a hell of a shot. Showback, I don't think she really expected it to come off that stick as quick as it did. And then, as you mentioned, St. Cloud being opportunistic, but really for the first 60 minutes, you mentioned shots on goal. St. Cloud was pushing back the entire game. Number two, the defensive blue line for St. Cloud was a freaking fortress. Brian Idelsky said it himself. This game had a playoff feel to it. It looked like a playoff game. It felt like one. Being in the building for that game, there was plenty, like you said, 700. It felt like a crowd there. There were actually a bunch of Gophers fans that traveled up there. And I think
that speaks exactly to the testament of how good this Huskies team is, that they're willing to travel.
Because in years past, I think we're being honest about it. I don't think Gophers fans would have made the trip because it's like, okay, well, how bad is it going to be? Meaning how lopsided is it going to be in the Gophers' favor? I think it is indicative that this is going to be a good series. And it was a great Tuesday game. And again, a 1-goal game. It comes in the extra session. And you could see after that post game, the emotional sort of slouch, because I really feel like St. Cloud felt that they had a chance a couple different times during that game to pull ahead. And I do think that they did. They did not help themselves with the late period overtime penalties that they took. I think if you would have asked Brian Idelsky, honestly, if he was, maybe some beads of sweat running off of his head during, those last little bit, I think he would say yes. But I think overall, I know that his comments after the game were that was one hell of an entertaining hockey game. Granted, still not happy that they came out essentially figuratively on the losing end of it. But as far as women's hockey and us covering them for the past couple of years, me being in the building and being on the call for BTN Plus, that is the best effort I've seen out of St. Cloud and the women's team that I've ever seen in my 3 or 4 years covering that squad. It was one hell of a game.
Yeah, well, this is hands down the best team we've ever covered for the Huskies on the women's side. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like you mentioned, 3 sets of coincidentals throughout this hockey game. And then, as you mentioned, the Huskies, Taylor Larson had a penalty. Clara Himmelhover a little bit before that, tied up with that coincidental with Ella Huber. And then Cece Bolby, like you mentioned, Sonia Hola stops 27 of 28 in this one, playing all 65 minutes and change. And we talked about kind of St. Cloud's run, where they were going to get Ohio State, they were going to get the Gophers on that Tuesday, and then they were going to get Duluth. Nick, I think the first thing that we have to point out as we move into that Friday contest, the Huskies only lost one of those games in regulation.
Yeah.
They lost, they lose 3 total. They win 2. They go 2-3, but really they went
technically 2-2-1.
2-2-1, exactly. Yeah. I in a heartbeat, I would take that. And the Huskies probably had a chance to steal an extra point or two, like you mentioned, especially in the shootout. You move into Friday, the Huskies do lose 2-1. And this one was an overtime and a game where the Huskies outshot their opponents somewhat heavily, 38-27, 15-10 in the first, 11-8 in the second, 11-5 in period number 3. And then the Bulldogs, of course, had some pushback, also a power play goal. Unfortunately, a power play is kind of coming back to bite the Huskies on that Friday, unfortunately. First of all, the lone goal that the Bulldogs scored in regulation, a very, 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 very rare miscue by JoJo Chobak in that. Just a weird little dump in that was kind of across the grain, moving, from one side to the other, from glove side to blocker. And I just don't know if it was fluttering, if she didn't pick it up clean.
It wasn't fluttering. It looked like, from my perspective, it caught the top of her glove. Just didn't field it cleanly. It wasn't a fluttering puck. It was I mean, it looked like it was an attempted shot on net, attempted dump in right on net. It was certainly high too, and you kind of wonder too when you're out in your extended reach if maybe the depth perception of where the puck is maybe slightly tougher to manage,
or is it necessary to play the puck?
Right, and and JoJo knew right away. Her reaction right after that puck fluttered in was indicative, and I think on the bench, if you're Adulski, you're maybe worried about where the mental game was after that. She rebounded just fine, and again, we'll talk about the overtime winner again at a little bit later, but I feel like it didn't really seem to rattle her, which is good. She was really, really good. And, you hate to say it, but, for a goaltender that talented, that was a tough one to watch. Because you take that one off the board, Huskies maybe could have came away with that win too.
Yeah, certainly a little bit painful. Really nice play, though, for the Huskies, kind of coming back into the zone, creating essentially a mini 3-on-2, entering the zone, play into the middle of the ice. Trailer is in the slot. Right-handed shot across the grain. The Huskies are on the board. It was Avery Farrell's fourth of the season, Ella Onik, and Katie Kaufman, who's had a whale of a season in the assist category at the 13:50 mark of the third period, had the Huskies in it. And then Tova Henderson, 2:53 into the overtime session on the power play, like we mentioned, pretty much a net mouth scramble 4-on-3, and a defenseman gets the loose change and the rebound and shoots through that screen. And I mean, nothing a goaltender can do on that one, So, all in all, I mean, I feel like the Huskies have to feel good about that, effort. I mean, essentially they go 35 wins, 34 losses in the faceoff dot, much improved over the course of the weekend. Do allow a power play goal on only 2 opportunities, being the game winner in overtime. They go 0 for 3, which is a little bit uncharacteristic for them, at least for the first 2 games of the week. And even, into Saturday, they go 0 for 3. Duluth, again, 1 for 2 on their lone goal of the game. So a bit of an interesting weekend, all things considered. They were outshot 36-29 in the last one, including 17-6 in the second period, but it really didn't matter. The Huskies certainly capitalized on a pair of goals in the second period, one in the first to carry a 3-0 lead into the third before Duluth had a little bit of pushback and made it interesting before a pair of empty netters. But, you look at the Huskies, rebound, gets them on the board, goal off of a rebound. Second one is a nice backhand, essentially defenseman blown coverage. Yeah. And I don't know if the defenseman thought that she wasn't going to cut back into the middle, but I mean, just totally blown coverage and a backhand. Really nice shot there. Breakaway on the third goal for the Huskies, forehand backhand. And the Huskies, take a 3-0 lead, and then it's 3-1, a really nice redirect from Duluth that was able to get them back on the board. You thought maybe they were going to have some pushback, not to be extra attacker on the ice. D-to-D, pass broken up. Huskies make it 4-1, and then a turnover in neutral, essentially in garbage time, makes it 5-1, and the Huskies, just like that, take a very well-deserved set of points in regulation, as you mentioned. Alice Surreal, her fourth. Avery Farrell, her fifth. That one was shorthanded, that breakaway goal, by the way. Clara Himlarova, her seventh of the season, pacing the team. Addie Scribner adds her second of the week. Taylor Larson, her first of the year into the empty net. Sophiana Sunland, Katie Kaufman, again tallying another assist. Emma Gentry, Dale Ross, and Taylor Lind round out your assist getters, as we look at Sonia Hola stopping 35 of 36. So all in all, Nick, this team stands at 13-6-1, 8-5-1 in the WCHA. Standings-wise, they are in a home ice position by a single point. They are in fourth place, a .595 winning percentage in conference. Everybody has played 14 games up to this point in conference. Ohio State leads the pack with 37 points. Imagine that. They're a good hockey team. Who would have thunk? And then Minnesota actually in second at 33, Wisconsin at 31. You talk about how much of a difference some of those games in recent weeks for Wisconsin have kind of changed things a little bit. And the Gophers, to their credit, have stayed pat. St. Cloud within relative striking distance at 25 points. Duluth right behind them at 24. And then 9, 6, and 3 respectively for Mankato, Bemidji, and St. Thomas, who got their first conference win of the season last week. But Nick, as far as I look, we do not have any games coming up in the WCHA besides some non-conference games for Bemidji State on the 29th and 30th of December. Don't forget, the men will actually be at Bemidji for the Huskies on the flip side, and then January gets things rolling with the wrap up for a lot of holiday tournaments, and the Huskies will actually do battle against St. Thomas on January 6th. Will be their next action.
Exhibition game. Yep. Recently added to in the last week or so.
Yep. Their official action gets them back underway against Mankato the 12th and 13th back into WCHA play. But I mean, this team, we talked about it, very good 18 wins last season, pushing that program record, closer to 20 and things like that. I mean, this team is no doubt about it. I mean, 13 wins already on the season. We're hitting the halfway mark. They're well above 500, almost 600 in WCHA play. I mean, this is everything we could have asked for. I think if you look back and I'm curious your opinion on this, Nick, if you look back at their schedule throughout the first half, right? They beat Union. They split against Mercyhurst, sweep Bemidji, 1 goal lost against the Gophers. They beat Northeastern and Lindenwood handily, sweep Mankato. Pair of losses to Wisconsin. Both those games were either tied or 1-goal contests in the last 5 minutes of those. Pair of close shutouts against St. Thomas. Big victory against the number 1 team in the country, Ohio State, before losing the next evening. And then this previous week, a shootout loss, overtime loss, and a victory against Duluth, Nick. I mean, I would say maybe you deserve to at least get 1 win against the Gophers, and you probably deserved at least some points against Wisconsin. But other than that, the small blip against Mercyhurst early in the season is really the only blemish for this squad that has otherwise been more than serviceable throughout the first half of the season. Certainly the most exciting women's team that we've seen in the program in quite some time.
Number 8 also in the country by the coaches poll. So not only are they in great position in the WCHA, they're in great position in terms of pairwise.
7 actually in the coaches poll. Okay. And pairwise is 7 as well. So they are well within a NCAA slot right now.
They are. And so you wonder what's next, right? And I say that because I think, and Brian Adelsky talked about this 5 games and 8-day stretch, which is, he actually kind of said, it's kind of on me, because I think he kind of thought, okay, maybe to the casual eye, this is why would I put Ohio State, the Gophers, and UMD back to back to back in such a short time? And he had mentioned to the girls, and to your point, Noah, for Friday's game, on paper they looked all right. I will tell you that you could see that they were not quite the same team energy wise. Idolsky said maybe it's just the emotional drainage from that game against Minnesota. But he goes, I wanted our team to go through what it would probably look like come February or March, when you're playing in the WCHA champion, tournament. And then maybe if we're in an NCAA tournament spot, you're going 1 game versus the next, and it's a quick turnaround to the Frozen Four. He's like, I wanted our team to know what it's like to play games back to back to back against really good opponents. Now that we're through that, I think, as we said before, 2-2-1, you got to be happy with that. And I think more so against the Gophers, 1 bounce, that's 3. A little bit better outing against Duluth, you could argue they could have had 4 of the 5.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, 5 out of 9 points in the past week, essentially 7 out of 15 total against, 3 of the top 10 teams in the country, like
almost top 5, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, you have to feel really good about that for this program. And we've raved about them quite a bit. It's, the attendance was only in the 300-400s throughout Friday and Saturday's games. And part of me is like, how, in my mind, how are there not over 1,000 people in the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center right now watching this team? I mean, it's just like,
it's tough right now, because I did the game on Sunday with Tori Holtz, a longtime St. Cloud State broadcaster, has done both American League as far as NHL work. He's been around. Also roomed with Tyler Arneson, apparently, also when he was at his time in school there. But he mentioned he did the first ever women's game at that building, and the attendance was 1,500. I would think that there still are some skeptical fans that are out there. And the sad part is, I get it, but I do wonder if this team continues to maintain a home ice spot And it's something that I talked with some of the St. Cloud admin about as we were there this past weekend, doing 3 games in 5 days. My voice is feeling a little bit, but there's already talk about, okay, we haven't done one in a while. In fact, the last time the St. Cloud got out of the quarterfinals for the WCHA was 2008, I believe. So it's been a minute. So there's a lot of anticipation growing with this squad and what it's really capable of. And I think, especially as we get to the second half, if they continue to pull points from these big teams, they continue to take care of business like teams, hate to say it, Mankato, St. Thomas, and Bemidji State, this team is going to be above 20 wins for the first time ever in program history. They're in a pairwise spot where they are an NCAA lock, and dare I say, a possible home ice position for the first round of the WCHA playoffs, and then maybe a trip to the WCHA Frozen Face-Off at Ritter Arena. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see more fans turn up for this squad as time rolls, and they really, because I can't speak for the fan base, but you do kind of wonder with just some of the history of this program, especially over the past, cumulative 5 to 10 years, success hasn't been there, right? So I think there's still some, shall we say, skeptical fans that are out there.
Yep.
I think that with Idalski, he turned ahead last year, but I think he's going to make some believers as we go throughout the season. I really think this team is going to be a team to reckon with come February and March. I really do.
Yeah, and certainly some manageable teams, St. Thomas for the exhibition, and then Mankato and St. Thomas again before you have Ohio State, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Duluth, and that's going to be your tough sledge through the middle. And I think if the Huskies can have a good showing against Ohio State, maybe take one against them or Wisconsin, you're going to start to see people perk up as we hit the middle of February. Bemidji State will round out the regulation schedule before the playoff push. This Huskies team, of course, very good. In fact, even when they've led after the first or second, they've not lost a hockey game. When they've been tied, they've been well over 500. When they've trailed after the first, they've still been 1-2-1. It's only when they trail after 2 periods of play that they've yet to find a victory across this season. Plus 22 goal differential, outshooting their opponent by almost 100 shots, 11-1 when scoring first, a pairwise points percentage just under 700. So a lot of really great things here. I would say if you're the Huskies, the only thing to really clean up here, power play is 18.8%. You'd like to see that tick up just a little bit. And then special teams, especially over the course of the past week, now down to 83% on the PK. That's got to be a little bit better. Unfortunately, that was kind of the Achilles heel just a little bit last weekend. So, but all in all, Nick, I think it's safe to say a very good first half for this squad. Clara Himlerova and Katie Kaufman paced the team with 15 and 14 points, respectively. It is your goal and assist leader, Clara Himlerova, with 7 tucks on the year. Katie Kaufman, 11 assists on the season. Alice Surreal, the only other player to hit the double-digit mark with 10 points on the year. Sani Ahola, a 9.67 save percentage and a 0.8 goals against through 10 total contests. She has allowed less than a goal per game, which obviously that's what the stat means, but still, just for those who don't know, less than a goal per game she has allowed for this Huskies group. And JoJo Chobak, a meager 1.71 and a 931 save percentage to boot, and probably could be even better if it wasn't for that unfortunate dumping in that initial game for the Huskies on Friday. But Nick, final thoughts here on the women's group. Obviously, a big test for them. Being off for almost a calendar month. That is something that I think you talked about people who are skeptical. They've got to, the exhibition game theoretically against St. Thomas means nothing, and St. Thomas has played them very well. But then when you get Mankato and St. Thomas on the WCHA swing around, you've got to take care of business there. You have to come out of the gate hot in the second half. I think if you don't, you start to really kind of sow the seeds of doubt. And I know Ohio State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Duluth, those games are going to be what they're going to be. But, I think for Brian Idalski and company, those first 4 games against very handleable opponents, you got to make sure you take care of business. Just start the second half on the right foot and then go from there. And it's going to be what it's going to be. So big challenge coming up here in the next month, just to kind of stay fit and stay in the mental game.
And a big reason to that is why they added the exhibition game against St. Thomas Noah. In fact, it was Idalski's call, speaking with those in the athletic department, is that, the first game back, because you mentioned, is a calendar month. He didn't want it to be in a game where, shall we say, it had conference implications, even though it's a sort of a conference opponent, but exhibition, right? I think it's great because there's going to be mental rust. There's probably going to be maybe the timing and, just some of that, game decision rust that you have to, kind of get off. And I think Adalski is looking at this squad and sees the potential here, right? I don't think you would necessarily add a game this late in the year, 5 weeks prior, if you didn't feel like, okay, we want to start off our second half on the right foot. And I think it's a smart way to go. But going back to the first half, again, 13 wins. You're 5 away from tying a program record. There's no way in heck they're not getting that. There just isn't, right? I do feel like this squad has a chance and a very good one at getting at least 20 wins for the first time ever. I feel like this team is a legitimate playoff threat. I feel like this team, if it plays to the way that I saw them play the Gophers, they can compete with almost any team in the country if that's the effort they put on night in, night out. Again, we talked about it. It was 2-2-1. They could easily be 4-1. I really believe that. A bounce here, a bounce there, they're that close. So you just hope that for this women's squad that they can, as you mentioned, that reboot is going to be so important, which is why I like the exhibition game. If they can essentially shake off some rust, get, kind of the feet back underneath them, in a game that you're not playing each other. We talked about, sort of the mentality, stuff with that. I think this team is, the sky's the limit right now, and it's going to be such a great story to follow. They have a very home-heavy schedule through January and then early February, and then a very road-heavy schedule to finish it out. So, can they take advantage of that home ice? Can they fight through 3 straight road series to close things out? I think there is some adversity there that, that they're going to have to figure out and be able to battle through. But if they got through this 5-game and 8-day stretch, should be able to handle it. And more so, I think the confidence level on this team is on the rise. Again, if there's anything that this last week plus a day has done, is say, hey, we can compete, we can beat. Again, Ohio State could have had it against the Gophers, probably should have had both against Duluth. Mind you, broke a basically 11-game winless streak against UMD on Saturday. There's a lot of things to like about this squad, and they're only getting started.
Yeah, in the last 2 weeks, like you said, kind of put us from, well, we'll see kind of where they're at. Can they really respond to, oh yeah, they're for real. This team has, if they play to their potential, they are right in the mix. Should be a very good ride through the second half of the season. On the flip side, the men also playing to their potential very, very nicely here. First of all, before we get to the Huskies, of course, some national scores as we recap the past week here. We will get to NCHC as well. The Gophers beating Ohio State in night number 1, and then in night number 2, it ended up being an overtime finish. I can't remember who won the shootout in that one. I had it up and then I lost it. So, but yeah, that Ohio
State marbles, man.
Well, then Ohio State has kind of been in and out. Michigan beating Notre Dame. That Michigan State team is who I'm talking about. Very good hockey team this season. I think people are, and they beat Notre Dame again 2-1 the next night. They've got a good squad. I think people are kind of overlooking how good the Spartans may be this season. Wisconsin wins 4-1 on Saturday and 6-3 on Friday against Penn State. So just a couple of scores to kind of take a look at. CCHA continues to beat up on each other. Bowling Green, the only team to escape with a sweep this past weekend.
Beat up on each other or falter against each other.
It's been kind of interesting as far as schedules for the upcoming week. We have a couple of games going on in the next week and a half or so. A really interesting one in the national stage coming up this Friday. Alaska Fairbanks will host Augustana. That'll be an interesting little matchup to see how the Independent and Augustana kind of match up and play each other. So, but NCHC wise, we had, of course, some intrigue. No NCHC team plays after the previous weekend that we're going to recap until Thursday the 28th. Duluth has Northeastern in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for the Quick Trip Holiday Face-Off. So on Friday of last week, it was Western Michigan 7, Denver 3. Denver responds with a 6-5 overtime finish, 21 combined goals across that series. Throughout the weekend, this Denver team, it's been really interesting. Nick, you, myself, and Max Veach had a really good conversation on NCAA, which will come out in the next day or two as well, too. Kind of about the week that the NCHC has had. I thought it was a fantastic discussion, but it's been really interesting just to see how the NCHC has kind of had some unique looks to it, and I had a pretty hot take about how many teams might actually make the NCAA docket at the end of things here. Speaking of Max Veach's Duluth Bulldogs, overtime finish. Duluth wins in a shootout the first night before a 3-1 regulation victory. That one was in Oxford, Ohio. Miami getting their first point of the season for the Redhawks, who have had an otherwise abysmal NCHC schedule. Them and the Huskies pretty much flip-flopped. But the surprise of the weekend, the Tigers finally played like the Tigers team that we expected to have this year. A pair of 3-2 overtime finishes in North Dakota. The Tigers getting some crucial points to slip into that 5 spot in the NCHC. What a great showing for that Tiger squad, Nick. And really, if you're a Huskies fan, you have to feel good about the Tigers kind of buying you a little bit of space as well, too, with a couple extra points taken away from the Fighting Hawks, who sit in second in the standings.
Yeah, and this was the Tigers team that we thought we would see earlier in the year. Because we go back to our previews, and we thought that they would, with some of the additions that they had, and now under year number 3 with Coach Chris Mayotte, that they would have taken another bigger step earlier. One thing we probably forgot to consider is their youth too. They're a young team that they got some turnover there, especially and again losing some veteran guys, McCowan and Ewan. And at the end of it, they're starting to come together a bit. And to sweep North Dakota in their building for the first time in 30 years, I think we said it on NCAA. That's not an easy feat, especially with that building's never great to any opponent. Number one, number two, CC historically has, like many teams, struggled in that building. That's not an easy place to play.
Well, think about if it's been 30 years, it would be in the old Ralph Fingelstead. It wouldn't even be in the new building.
How about that? Right, that's true. So at the end of it, I mean, you kind of wonder what that does for CC and their confidence, right? Granted, I think they're probably in the side of the realm that says, really, this had to happen now before a holiday break, essentially. I think they probably want to keep playing, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of it, they'll have to, go back. Most teams, there's going to be some players that are probably playing with some injuries, nagging here and there. So it's going to be good to rest up, get some time away. But you do wonder, man, after coming off such a great road series against UND, who, mind you, that's one hell of a hockey team up there. I'm almost puking in my mouth saying that, but they're good. What that might do to catapult them in their second half, because I'm sure we'll touch on this, but the NCHC, kind of what we predicted, 7 through 3, is very close with each other. You kind of wonder what teams are going to take advantage of the second half and what teams will not. I don't know.
Yeah, 5 points separating that group. Like you mentioned, Miami pulling up the rear 0-7-1. They've got a single point to their credit. Omaha and Duluth both with 9 points. And Colorado College, like you mentioned, 1 point ahead with 10. Denver at 13, Western Michigan at 14, North Dakota at 18. And you talk about the difference here. Denver at 13, North Dakota at 18. Both are 5-3 on the season. CC at 10 in 5th place. Western Michigan with 14 in 3rd place. Both 4-4 on the season. So the overtime wins and losses have made a big difference. The Huskies sit atop the conference 7-0-1 now, entering the holiday break, taking 22 of 24 possible points. We'll kind of recap their weekend, but they have a 9-1 severed conference points percentage. So that's not too shabby. Speaking of our aforementioned Huskies, let's jump over to Friday. Of course, a traditional weekend for them. They were on the road at Baxter Arena in Omaha. 6,286 is the attendance. I love Baxter Arena. I think it's a fantastic, very underrated venue. Pretty good at hosting COVID pods too, if we're being honest. Shots 28 aside in this one, the Huskies win 4-1, 11-9 in period number 1, 11-10 in period number 2 and actually outshot 9-6 to finish this hockey game. Relatively even face-off wise, 22 wins, 24 losses for the Huskies, so just under 50%. It was actually Jack Randall who got the scoring started for Omaha. It was their lone goal of the game about just under 13 minutes into the first period before Werner Miettinen on the power play, his second of the year from Zach Okabe and Barrett Hall, had the Huskies back in it before the end of period number 1. And then kind of a controversial one, 2:38 into the second, Ryan Rosborough's first of the season, Barrett Hall and Jack Ryman tallying assists. And this was one, Nick, kind of a gutsy call. Barrett Hall drives the net off of the nice zone entry. He gets tripped up by the defenseman, crashes into the netminder. And you kind of wonder, are they going to let that one stand, even though the defenseman is the one who aided, Hall into the net there? And, I'd like to say they got the call correct. Like I said, I didn't really know, because you can see that one going either way depending on how the officiating crew looks. They deemed that essentially it was the Omaha defenseman who put Hall into his own goaltender by proxy, so to speak, and credit Rosborough crashing the crease as the second forward in, and he's able to chip one in to get the Huskies the lead that would stand throughout the night. And that was kind of the key throughout the weekend. You look at Dylan Anhorn second from Zach Okabe, Josh Lidke less than a minute into the third period. Essentially, puck on net, rebound, it goes off a body, guys driving the crease, and Kyler Kupka finishes it off. Empty netter with half a minute to play, his 6th of the season. Dominic Bassey stops 27 of 28. The Huskies get a key victory, Nick. Did you feel like that call in the second period? One, did you feel like it was the right call? But number two, were you kind of, on the edge of like, this one really could go either way? Did you feel like it was a turning point for St. Cloud, or, how did you like the Huskies play in night number 1?
It was the correct call. It's a very similar read as to what you'd see in the NHL. Whereas, if the defenseman of the defending team initiates contact, puts him in without essentially no way for the a forward player to avoid going into the goaltender. I mean, there's no way he can get out of his way. It's a live puck. You can't just stop play. It's kind of like the old knock the net off of the moorings type play. Oh, wait, that still happens too. So, but it was Ryan Roseborough's first NCAA goal, right? Yeah. So I think that was a turning point because, again, we talk about how stingy Omaha is, especially defensively. They're a tough team to especially get into, shall we say, the dangerous parts of the ice. And they're a team that forces you to take the punishment right in front of their own blue paint. And if you can do that, sometimes you're rewarded. And a good job, again, by Rosborough to follow up too, right? You talk about stopping on pucks and getting multiple guys into that blue paint area to dig for anything that's loose. A fortunate bounce for the Huskies. And I think sometimes in tight checking games, you have to see that puck roll across the goal line for you to get some confidence, get some, pop in your step. And I feel like the Huskies took control there. I felt like they were playing a little tight. And, before then, Noah, I'm not sure if you saw the same thing, but I felt like things kind of calmed down and they kind of settled into the game after that. It just sometimes just takes a little bit of a bounce and maybe a fortunate break, even though I don't see it that way. I think it was the correct call from start to finish. And again, I got to credit the Huskies for crashing the net, looking for the loose change and taking advantage of the play that was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Huskies go 1 for 3 on the power play. Perfect 5 for 5 on the kill. That would be the lone power play tally for the Huskies over the weekend. They go 0 for 1 in night number 2. Perfect 2 for 2, though, for the Huskies on the kill in the second night. And as is typical, St. Cloud gets off to a good start, lets them relax a little bit with a Friday night victory. Saturday, they lose 3-2 in a shootout, 2-2 in terms of the tie for the pairwise. But as far as NCHC points, there's where your difference maker is. Huskies actually outshot in this one, 33-23. They had pretty close margin. They were outshot 9-8 in the first, 11-7 in the second, and then 10-7 in the third, 3-1 in the extra session. But face-off wise, a little bit tougher, only 22 wins, 29 losses. But the Huskies did get on the board first in this one. First goal, a beautiful play back into the slot. Grant Ashawn, I thought he maybe should have shot it right away, but he didn't. His second of the season, he goes forehand, backhand, shelf. Huskies are on the board 5 minutes in. Jack Peart, Tyson Gross with assists. And then Kirby Kirby Proctor, unfortunately, absolutely walked Werner
Yes,
Bietman with that toe drag. That was a beautiful play, 4-on-4, less than a minute left in the opening frame, and we're deadlocked at ones. Actually tied after the second period, too. Ty Mueller, his sixth of the season, halfway through the period, and then Kyler Kupka's seventh from Warren Clark at the 17:29 mark. Unfortunately, that second one, that was a tough one, kind of a short side shot that I kind of feel like Isaac Posh might have wanted to have back, unfortunately. It kind of is what it is. Huskies fought back. A simple chip off the glass finds Kyler Kupka. Backhand, forehand flick, kind of driving around the defender, and the Huskies tie that one up until we get to the shootout. Vietti Miettinen, Kyler Kupka, Barrett Hall unable to tally in the shootout, and Ty Mueller is the only one who scores. A little short side flick for him on the blocker side. Thought Barrett Hall had a chance on his backhand to maybe tie it up in round number 3, but I don't think the netminder saw it clean. But nonetheless, that was kind of all she wrote for Omaha getting the victory. I don't know that St. Cloud played particularly well in this one. I thought Omaha did a much better job creating opportunities. Isaac Posh, of course, gets first real strong action for the Huskies in net. So obviously, I thought he was more than serviceable besides that unfortunate little bounce for him on that short side goal. I thought he was more than fine. But Huskies not exactly perfect heading out of the NCHC through the first half. We're pretty darn close to it. The only other takeaway I would have from Saturday is, gosh, those gray jerseys for Omaha are
not great.
Yeah, they've got
not my favorite.
They've got that great logo, and they just that's what they did with it, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked it all black.
Yeah,
personally, but I mean, we're not fashion experts, are we? No. I think the Huskies just, got what they deserved on Saturday. I really do. And that's kind of a tip of the cap to Omaha for the adjustments that they made in game number 2. Yeah. But also for St. Cloud. Again, not as clean, especially out of their own zone. I felt like, again, that's more of a tribute to Omaha. Again, when they commit to taking away shall I say, the middle part of the ice, and that is just the lane from all 3 zones. They're a tough team to kind of go up ice against because they know when to time things, to step up, to take away passing lanes. They read what the play that comes at them very well. And then again, St. Cloud just couldn't get into the interior in the offensive zone. I think Omaha did a good job keeping things to the outside, and just there wasn't as much free ice out there. So. It wasn't quite as, like you said, the execution just quite wasn't there. Again, Omaha tightened things up a bit. And that's sort of that prototypical Omaha win, right, where you sort of just kind of grind it out. You keep it low scoring, you keep it close. If you can get to the extra frame, maybe a shootout, great. But you kind of frustrate your opponent. And you could see frustration from the Huskies on Saturday. At least I did. I'm not sure if you saw the same thing. But at the end of it, it had to happen at some point. But as we mentioned, on our other show, 7-0-1 for the first 8 games of conference play. You're sitting 4 points at the top. I still think you're in pretty good spot.
Yeah, Huskies coaches poll and pairwise respectively at 14 aside. Coaches poll coming out today on the 11th. Colorado College actually slotting it at 20 in the poll, so I don't know how much I really read into that, to be honest with you. A lot of East teams at the top, of course. As far as the pairwise is concerned, the Gophers, St. Cloud, and Michigan at 13, 14, 15 respectively. Top team according to the pairwise is Quinnipiac, which apparently they had a good finish to the year last year. As far as NCHC action, like we mentioned, the Huskies and everybody else off until the tail end of December. Huskies will have Bemidji the 29th and 31st. They're at the Sanford Center the 29th. 31st, they're back home at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center. First half, though, Huskies go 9-5-2. 6 of their 7 losses coming in non-conference play this season. They have yet to win a game in overtime or the shootout. They lost in overtime against St. Thomas. They beat St. Thomas the next night to kind of recap the first half of the schedule here. An overtime victory in which they led 2-0, then dropped 3 straight goals against. Mankato takes the victory, and then 5-1 the second night was kind of a really tough start to the season. A split against Fairbanks, which they probably could have taken both just by stats alone, but the Nanooks doing a good job in night number 2. Then the Huskies, they started conference play and they really haven't looked back. Winners of 6 straight against Miami, Western Michigan, and Duluth before non-conference 2-0 loss and a beautiful comeback for the shootout victory 4-3 against Michigan and the Wolverines. That was a heck of a hockey game. 2 really good games for both of those over the course of the holiday weekend. And then Omaha 4-1 victory, as we mentioned, and the shootout loss to Roundup. The first half of the season, Huskies, like we said, have 2 more games before the calendar year flips over. Second half, in case you were curious, Denver, North Dakota, Omaha. First one of those is on the road and then at home for 4 straight before 4 on the road to start February. CC and Miami, both games and trips that the Huskies could have good success in potentially, although the way the Tigers played last weekend, you never really know. And then back at home for 4 straight again, Western and Denver to start March, and then finishing out as they usually do against Duluth. This one, March 8th and 9th, up at Amsoil on the road to cap off the regular season. So Nick Vieti-Miettinen pacing the team, 14 points for him, continues to sit on 10 goals for the season. Kyler Kupka, Dylan Anhorn, Adam Ingram at 13, 13, and 12 points respectively are your top 4 point getters for this group. In net, like we mentioned, Isaac Posh gets his first test. I mean, a 9.57 for him and a 1.22 goals against. I mean, a pretty good opponent in Omaha that he saw last weekend. Dominic Bassi, a 9.13 for him and a 2.22 goals against. That's starting to even out as they go through the season. But Nick, this team, just under 20% on the power play, just over 86% on the PK. Positive goal differential, I believe it will be +9 on the season. Outshooting their opponents, not as heavily as the women are right now, but the men's team still doing what they have to do. A little bit more even splits because of their non-conference schedule. But I guess if we kind of had to encapsulate a little bit of the men's season, bit of a shock on the negative side in the non-conference game to start.
Yeah.
Bit of a shock on the other side, all things considered. Even if they had a great start in the NCHC, they're 7-0-1 entering the holiday break. How do you look at the first half of this season when it's like the Huskies are now, minus maybe Saturday, playing really well? They didn't start off that way. You know, is it sustainable? Are they overplaying to their capability? How do we quantify the first, whatever it would be, 15, 16 games of the season?
I think the lazy answer would be, slow start, fast finish, but that would be lazy.
And that's the show.
Yeah, right. And we're done. No. But the reality is, when we looked at this roster, we saw what the Huskies lost. Spencer Meyer in the back end, Brendan Bushy, Andre Treyball. There were some questions as to the defensive depth. Not big questions, but okay. There's some holes to fill, right? Losing Yami Kranila down the middle. Oh, wait, they didn't have any centermen at the start of the year. I mean, that was something we talked about, right? Who's going to take faceoffs? Was Werner Miettinen, who had a very good junior campaign with Fargo, was he going to get the top 6 minutes? And was Brett Larson going to maybe experiment putting him alongside his brother just because of the natural chemistry, right? I think what we saw, so for those paying attention, this is not the lazy answer, is a team that had youth at some key positions that had to figure it out. I think that's really what it was. And the non-conference, is it arbitrary to a point because it's just how the schedule is written? Sure. Could you imagine that if you started right away in conference play, how different of a story this looks?
Yeah.
Right. And historically, right, the past, 4, 5, 6 seasons, St. Cloud has had a very strong non-conference schedule. So this was a bit of a shock. But you could see it, right? There were some things that needed, that the wheels weren't all clicking. They weren't all in sync, right? They get, was it between the Mankato series where they got that first bye week where it was like, okay, this is one they needed. And then all of a sudden, you get to conference play. And I think your first sign of, okay, we're doing okay was you go to Western Michigan, you go to Lawson, and you get that sweep. Something, you haven't won there since 2019, and nonetheless sweep. Okay, that's good. Okay, but that's 4 games. And then they win another 2. Granted, Duluth playing very desperate hockey because, as we've chronicled, a very tough start for them. Huskies had a tough start. My goodness, UMB's had a horrendous start.
Yep.
But they played very well. They were two very tight games, and St. Cloud found a way to get the W's in both, right? So we're going, okay. So they're taking care of business, and they're finding different ways to win, right? Omaha, again, another good opponent. I think Omaha just, for whatever reason, they're underrated for what they should be.
Especially at Baxter Arena, the Huskies have had a tough time. It's kind of becoming the new Kalamazoo right now.
It kind of is. And again, it's similar style. It's not the same atmosphere. I think, the atmosphere in Lawson is a college hockey like bucket list item for anybody. I mean that with all due respect to Western Michigan. That's a hell of a building and a hell of an atmosphere. But it's different hockey, right? To a degree. So with that being said, you're sitting here December 11th, when if we look back to October 11th, we had very different outlooks of what this Husky team might look like when we got to this point. And so I think if you're Brett Larson, one, you're hoping that January doesn't come. You don't have to deal with Olympics. There's nobody going to World Juniors, so you don't have to deal with that adversity, if you call it, except for the head coach. He'll be on, and congrats to Brett. But you're now crossing your fingers, crossing your toes, your whatever, and you're just praying that you don't get an injury, right?
Yeah.
I think if this team can stay healthy, they still haven't really been tested by the big guns yet. Again, they haven't seen North Dakota. They haven't seen Denver yet. So we've seen what they could be capable of, but we haven't seen them being, shall we say, in the spotlight yet. So the book is still out yet, in my opinion. But hard to be upset about how way things started, the way that there are now, that there hasn't been tremendous progress. But we haven't pulled out the measuring stick yet, because that's yet to come here in the second half.
Yeah, well, if the Huskies go 4-4, I think it's a much different conversation throughout the conference play. Good showing against Michigan too. Obviously, Wolverines team, very good team as well too. But we talked about an NCAA, and the conversation was, who do you feel is an NCAA lock here right now? I said the only team I feel like really is North Dakota, and specifically for that reason, like you said, Nick, St. Cloud has yet to kind of have some big tests in conference right now. I mean, Western Michigan probably your biggest one so far. So it's still yet to see if they can continue to keep the train rolling, especially with the holiday break in between. Bemidji State will be an interesting test for the CCHA matchup non-conference, because of course non-conference has suddenly been an issue for the Huskies as of recent this year. So a bit of a flip-flop, but in the NCHC could only take maybe 3 teams this year to the NCAA. So the Huskies want to be on the right side of that line. They've had a really good start. You'll never scoff at winning 7 of 8 and grabbing points in all 8 in the NCHC, especially the way that teams are beating up on each other this year. The Tigers helped out the Huskies quite a bit over the previous weekend, heading into the holiday break with North Dakota and getting those victories at Ralph Engelstad. So the Huskies have some breathing room, 4 points respectively, taking 22 of 24 total. So all in all, I mean, you have to feel good about it. Like you said, if you're a Huskies fan, non-conference is a little bit desired, I think, more in the pairwise than anything else right now. But all you can do is look forward and continue to try to play your best hockey. Can the Huskies do that after 3 weeks off? We're going to find out December 29th and 31st, home and home versus Bemidji State as per usual. And should be a good one. Any kind of parting thoughts here, Nick, on either the men's teams, women's teams, Christmas? I mean, what do we got?
You're asking the old man at 9:20 for his parting thoughts when his brain is already half dead. No, I mean, honestly, great first halves by both teams. Honestly, they're both in pairwise positions currently. You're both are playing pretty decent hockey. Have never been able to say that before. But yet there's still more to be desired on both sides as well. You're always looking for ways to improve. I think you're going to see, maybe a hot take, that both of these squads are going to be NCAA tournament appearances for the first time together. I really feel that that's a possibility. St. Cloud is going to have to dig deep after the break here. Again, non-conference against Bemidji, you're going to have to find a way to get both of those, considering how the CCHA has looked. So basically you have to get through Friday, because Bemidji can't win on Saturday, but they are a fire wagon for a reason on Friday. But you can get through coming off a mini break with that. And then, like as you mentioned, you get into some really tough tests in the NCHC. As we say, it never gets easier in this conference; it gets harder. But I feel like now that things have settled down for the past 6-7 weeks for this men's squad, I think they're up to the challenge now, and I think they'll be ready to take on teams like North Dakota, Denver, Western Michigan, and Omaha again. I think that they're ready to go because at the end of the day, that's going to be, it's the second half push. You can't have a night off because as we saw, 3rd through 7, what is it, 5 points?
Yep.
In the NCHC that separates. So, I mean, a couple bad weekends you string together could mean trouble. But here's the other thing. St. Cloud came back from 9 winless last year, got hot at the right time, and propelled themselves not only to an NCHC tournament appearance, they secured themselves again another NCAA tournament appearance. And I'll tell you this, though, being at the Herb 3 times this week, I looked up at the banners. They're running out of room up there. So let's continue to fill the rafters, but hopefully maybe some more accolades on those banners, not just some tournament appearances. I'd like to see a national championship banner get raised one of these years because I think you got the coaches on both sides, you got the talent. Now let's go and get one.
Yeah, absolutely. Good first half for both squads. Men's team plays, like you mentioned, Friday, Sunday, the 29th and 31st to round off December, just under 3 weeks away. Women's team plays just under a calendar month away, Saturday on the 6th. It'll be some exhibition game against St. Thomas, and then both teams back in action the following weekend. So the men will be off after their weekend against Bemidji State. Mankato will be visiting town on the women's side, and then of course on the men's side, you get right back at it with the annual trip to Magnus Arena, which is always a tough one, against the Denver Pioneers on the men's side, January 12th and 13th. For Nick Maxson, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.